Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 2, Episode 18. Who is responsible for the expansion selling quota, and how to KPI AEs, AMs, RMs, and CSMs to get the most revenue possible and turn them all into a team. My name is Beck Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you do me a tiny favor, go to flipthescript.co and be sure to download the deck for this session. It's free after all, so that you can follow along at each step of the way. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump in. There is going to be 5 different pieces to today's agenda. Number 1, we need to understand what are the wins for any organization. Like, what are they really looking for and what are they after in terms of what is net the best thing for organizations at large, so we can really solve for why, if you will, by our comp plans. Number 2, the top 6 mistakes that I see with AE comp plans, typically that are within the industry. Number 3, the top 6 mistakes of CSM comp plans. Number 4, a new KPI and comp plan for AEs and CSMs if you don't have an upsell team. And number 5, we'll go to a KPI and comp plan if you do have a cross-sell, upsell team, etc., with AMs, RMs included. So I've seen both in the industry if you have an upsell team, so we want to be able to solve for why in both case scenarios. So let's jump into number 1, understanding the wins for an organization. So before I go into this, before you solve for any problem, you need to know what your goal is. So it sounds pretty bizarre to state it in that way, but before we start arranging comp plans where we're trying to solve for a problem, we need to understand what we're really net after in this situation. So in terms of an organization at large, understanding the wins of an organization, an organization cares about the following things when it comes to revenue. They care about money. They care about money, people. They care about money. That's what it's really all about. So number 1, the definitions that we're going to talk about today is they care about, in this case scenario, revenue through the initial land, revenue through expansion, revenue through land renewal, and revenue through expansion renewal. So we're going to have all 4 of those definitions in terms of today. But essentially, whenever you talk to any kind of organization about their CSM team, they're trying to avoid churn. So they're really after the land renewal and the expansion renewal, but they want to keep their customers on deck. So those are the things that they care about. They care about money, but within the context of those 4 items. So the top 6 mistakes of AE KPI and comp plans when it comes to making money for your organization. We're going to go into them slowly, but there are 6 different ones that I typically see in the industry. Number 1 is people who comp for new ARR on the land only. So a lot of different organizations, they say, well, the thought process is I want to get my AEs after new business and new ARR, so I'm only going to comp on that only. We will go into the litany of reasons why that is not going to achieve your goal and why that has a reverse effect on your account executives. But TLDR, this is, from what I've seen, can have some pretty severe negative ramifications, because then your account executives are not after the kinds of deals that net the most revenue overall or have the highest potential for revenue. They're after the organizations that have the most revenue on the land. So I'll give you an example. Enterprise companies, typically how they buy, the expression is don't let the whale sink the ship, but they don't buy, LinkedIn doesn't just buy 700 seats of software or 1,000 seats of software, even though they have that amount of reps that are available. Because of security purposes and because they're risk averse, they essentially don't want to deploy something across of all of their reps, because if there is a hiccup, a security breach, a bug, something that's not impactful within the software, they want to make sure that was tried out on, a limited number of reps, so that the damaging effects only sticks with that, let's say, first 50 or 100 max case scenario. So in selling software, what I've seen is most people, they'll sell like 20 seats on the initial land, because that's how enterprise buys. So whenever you're talking about an enterprise organization, let's take, LinkedIn for instance. LinkedIn has the luxury of having the name of LinkedIn, meaning they don't need necessarily you. So they have a lot of people who are coming to them wanting to sell into them. so they can raise the bar in terms of standards or requirements or things that they want in the selling process, and people will meet it because they want to stamp the LinkedIn logo all over their website. So they are not typically going to say like, yeah, okay, let's go ahead and deploy it across 1,000 people, because that's really, really risky. Even if the salesperson does a great job and there's proven results in terms of CS team, they want to try something right off the bat. And then they want to, try something and see if the concept works, and then expand based on that original subset. So if you're comping your account executives on the initial land only, if I were smart, I would say, okay, if I hunt LinkedIn, even though there's 1,000 reps available, sales reps available for this sale, the initial land is only going to be 20 reps. So if I'm comped on new ARR on the land only, then it would actually be smarter for me to go after mid-market orgs, because mid-market, even though they only have total, 150 reps, they will let me sell into all of the reps, where the initial land, at LinkedIn was only 20 reps. So if I'm comped on new land ARR only, that actually a mid-market org who long-term for my organization would be a much less, a less significant sale. It'd be 150 reps total, whereas the LinkedIn case, it'd be 1,000 reps total if we get deployment, et cetera, right, for, post-land. But if an AE is smart and you comp them on new AR on the land only, the more lucrative to me in terms of a rep is I'm only comped on new land ARR. They're not going to give me any credit for expansion sale. So I'm going to go for the highest brink of land ARR deals that I can get. So you'll see them lowering their bar to organizations that they can get the most reps approved, typically, instead of selling someone who's strategic, who could be good for your company from a logo perspective, and also net bring in a lot of money based off the expansion sale. So that's mistake number one. Number two is comping for net new ARR on land and expansion only within a certain period of time. The theory is great. Okay? The theory is great. But what I see happening on the execution of this theory is the following. So just for people out there who don't know what I'm talking about in point number two, this is for organizations that say like, okay, account executive, I'm going to give you comp for the land of the deal. And then also any expansion sale that happens within the first 6 months, I'm going to give you credit for that too. So two things. Number one, enterprise expands when enterprise wants to expand, right? So again, you might run into the first case scenario of LinkedIn. They're typically, even the POC or trial for these orgs can last anywhere from 6 to 8 months if you're not careful. So expecting them to not only deploy the software, but see value in the software and see value enough in the software to go for the expansion sale is a little, I would say, aggressive on that front end. So if I'm an account executive and I know that, again, a mid-market company is going to get a 150 rep sale, and LinkedIn, yeah, there's 20 reps on the land sale, and I might get credit for the expansion if it's within 6 months. I know that the likelihood is low that that's going to happen. A lot of times people don't expansion sale until year 2 or 3. And so you'll see account executives, just like in the first case scenario, hunting for mid-market orgs as opposed to a strategic or enterprise, as long as they're not out of segment, because they want that initial land only, and they don't think that they can hit that clip of expansion sale within 6 months. That's one problem. Number two is you'll see your CSM, your AE close the deal, they'll throw it over to CSMs, and CSMs will get into it a little bit later. But if they know that they're going to get credit for an expansion at 6 months post, I have seen CSMs legitimately know that there's an expansion sale and delay the expansion sale for several weeks until they're past the 6-month marker so that they can get credit from the comp perspective. So again, it's a great theory. But what happens in practice is the AE is trying to rush too aggressively the expansion sell. They start selling deals that are smaller just because they don't think they can hit the expansion clip. And your CSM is delaying someone from closing from an expansion perspective so that they can get comp underneath their belt. So great theory, really messy in practice. Number three, metricing on all-time ARR for any deals that rep has closed. So now, in the first case scenario, we were being too stringent and we were being kind of stingy as an org. In the latter case scenario, I've seen orgs say, if you close a deal, I'm going to metric you on ARR for that for all time. I want to work for that org. You'll see account executives, they'll close a massive deal, And then they are hitting their quota based on this ARR for years 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so what you'll see them doing is they're completely laying off the gas. They're like, oh, okay, my quota was, whatever, 200,000. I landed Coca-Cola and that was 100,000 within my first year. And so now I only have 100,000 delta that I have to make up with other deals. So I essentially don't have to gain net new ARR that as aggressively because I have Coca-Cola to count on year after year after year. So you want to, my mom always said when I was growing up, I'm from Texas, full disclosure, but she said that you want the promise of the kingdom and also the threat of the fiery gates of hell behind someone to get them moving. So we need to make sure that we're nice to our account executives, that we give them credit for the kinds of deals that they are responsible for bringing in. We give them incentive to hunt the best deals for our organization, but also that we don't completely lay off the gas. They need the threat of the fiery gates of hell behind them to hold them accountable. So mistake number 3 is metricing them on all-time ARR. So they have to book a couple of deals in their lifetime. Once they do, years 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc., they are coasting. So that is the third mistake that I've seen most commonly. Number 4, even more egregious, a past bag. Let's say in that original example, one rep closed Coca-Cola, and then that rep turned and went to another organization. And then a new rep got past Coca-Cola as their account. And somehow that account executive is getting ARR credit for not only a deal that they're not, manning or womaning or maintaining, they weren't even responsible for the sale to begin with. So you will get less deals closed by that rep because they already have a massive part of their percentage of their quota met by not only a deal that they closed, a deal that someone else closed. So this is less common, more parochial industries that I see this happening. Really telecom is a big industry that I see this happening for some reason. But basically the pass bag, you want to lay on the gas with your account executives. You want to give them credit for what they've done and make them incentivized to align to what you care about as an org. But you also want to make sure that you're not giving them too much glory, glamour, and quota alleviation, especially if they didn't close the deal. So that's the fourth most common mistake I see. Number 5, this is a huge one. No repercussion. The 5th mistake is there being no negative repercussion for deals churning in this post-close for misrepresentation of features or functionality by the account executive whenever they're in the sales cycle. I have seen very, very few programs not only care about this, but do something about it. So a lot of account executives, and it's not necessarily, I guess, their fault, like we need to hold them accountable, but because there's no metric for deals churning, you will see account executives out of, whatever, the quota is too high and they want to make, people happy and hit that number. They will start falsely misrepresenting a product roadmap, what features can do, what your product can do, because they are metriced on the land or the expand or both. And so they want to say like, hey, okay, maybe this deal's going to churn, on the back end, like we can't fulfill this promise, but it doesn't really matter because I need to alleviate my quota and I'm comped off of that first sale. So it doesn't matter to me if they expand, and if they churn because I told some unicorn lie that essentially we can't hold ourselves accountable to in this customer success portion of the puzzle, because I was metriced on this initial sale. So this is a very egregious issue in my experience that I've seen, a lot of reps, fudging numbers, saying that features exist when they don't. Oh, it's on the product roadmap, et cetera, and over embellishing product functionality so that they could close the deal, even when that's not the best deal for your org. Even if it is a great deal, it is misrepresented on what you can do. So what the initial agreement with your buyer matters, because they trust you up until you break that trust, best case scenario. So you break that trust, and then the customer success rep is footed with the bill of like, oh, well, the customer comes in, Oracle comes in, we finally close them based on some lie that the AE told in the sales cycle. The CSM inherits the deal. And then all of a sudden Oracle's like, yeah, so we were told that we could do these 10 things and that you're going to have this feature ready by November 1. And all of a sudden the CSM is like, WTH, mate, we can't do that, and we don't have that feature promised. And so not having any kind of negative repercussion, it's like, look, it's not necessarily the account executive's fault. Like, we need to instill some kind of metric for like, hey, you can do these bad things, but there is going to be a ramification, and it doesn't always have to be as severe as, oh, I'm going to let this person go. We want to give standards and communicate our standards culturally throughout the entire process. So it's like, you know, I have even seen on the SDR front, we're going to do the AE expand or how to metric this into AE in a minute. But I'll give you an example. You know, I ran SDR teams, and I had a problem with my SDRs booking outside of their territory. So one day I got smart and I walked in, I said, new rule, you can book whoever you want. But if it's outside of your territory, you don't get the credit for it. Number one. Number two, let's say we had the rule of if someone hadn't called on an account in 30 days, then you were able to, as an SDR, take the account and say, okay, I'm going to prospect into this. Then again, there's that accountability check. So I said, okay, even if an account frees up, let's say, you know, my original rep, Candace, hadn't called on Drift, and it has been 31 days, and my rep, Max, wants to take that account. If Max reaches out to Drift without putting Drift in his name first and books the meeting, the credit will go to Candace. So I would ensure that my reps are not only booking within their territory, but they are putting those accounts in their name within the respective rules before they do outreach, that everyone's above board, everything's in the CRM, there's a paper trail, and we're all playing fair. So I instilled that process. I had probably had 20 meetings that were booked outside of territory in the last month or two leading up to this rule. When I put that rule in place, it happened one time. One rep, let's call him Derek, booked out of territory. I said, I'm sorry, but this is in someone else's territory. Gave them credit for the meeting. Derek, not only did Derek never do it again, the entire team didn't do it again. So we need, from a fiscal perspective, to issue a standard of what we care about and what is acceptable to our org, and we need to comp accordingly. So this is the fifth biggest mistake, and I see it across a lot of different orgs, and it's really unfortunate, especially for the CSMs, but we'll get into how to solve for it, but this is the fifth biggest mistake. Number 6 is same kind of flavor, no negative repercussion to the account executive for deals churning because they lacked basic qualifying criterion. So this happens less frequently, you know, from what I've seen of, you know, maybe they were all field sales or mostly field sales whenever you sell into someone who's using, you know, remote selling software. This is pre-COVID, of course. But having no repercussion for deals that are churning for a criteria that were in the account executive's control, you know, by and large, like, we need to get rid of. And again, I'll go into the plan on how to do that in a minute. But this is the 6th biggest mistake that I see with AE comp plans. Let's go into top mistakes for CSM comp plans, and then we'll transition into, after we build all this problem issue child, how to solve for it. So CSMs, the number one mistake that I see for CSM comp plans is penalizing CSMs for customers who churn when a feature was promised in pre-sale but wasn't delivered on time by product. Probably just made a lot of fans, probably just made some enemies. We want to comp people for things that are within their control. So CSMs a lot of times inherit deals because, especially within enterprise, because something was promised on the feature roadmap that doesn't happen in time, and we are penalizing CSM from a comp perspective and a disciplinary perspective for that happening. So that's the biggest mistake, and I hope that this is a shot heard around the world for all my CSMs out there. You're doing an amazing job, and that one is not on you. So that is the number one biggest mistake. And when I talk to CSMs over, you know, when we're in a bar, you know, whatever, having a rum and Coke or whatever, this is something that they're talking about a lot of times, is that they were hit because, you know, a product feature didn't come to deck that the customer was promised before pre-sale to get them to sign. It wasn't delivered, and the deal churned, and they couldn't do anything about it. Number 2, penalizing CSMs for customers who churn due to amount of bugs in the product. Also, again, this is a product issue and arguably a CRO issue, but it certainly isn't on the CSM. You know, if someone churns because the product doesn't work, you know, it's not essentially up to the CSM. There are things that are within the CSM's control. It's not that they're always the victim, but this is a major source of heartburn for them. Number 3, penalizing CSMs for customers who churn because they can't fulfill on a lie that was made or a promise that was made in the sales cycle by the account executive. So all 3 of these are you're penalizing and taking it out on your CSM team for something that was out of their control and that they didn't do anything wrong. So these are the top 3 biggest mistakes where I've seen a number of reps churn because they were hit with each one of these. And if there's too many bugs in the product, then they're like, I just can't do it anymore because people are churning. They like me. I build rapport with them, etc. But then they're churning for these reasons and I can't control it. So I just need to go to a better org. Number 4, only accrediting CSMs to an expansion sale after a period of time. Again, I have seen reps before. I'll never forget. There was a CSM who was French, and he said to all the French speakers, native French speakers, they're going to kill me for my accent here, but he said, Beck, so I have this thing. So one of our clients, okay, I'm just going to stop with the French accent. He said, one of our clients is about to close a huge expansion sale, $175K. I said, push it forward. He said, no, I'm going to go to lunch. I'm like, why on earth would you go to lunch? He said, because it's 5 months and it's 28 days. And I'm like, oh, and you are metriced for all expansion sale after 6 months. He said, I've been holding on to this for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I have been delaying them from purchasing our software because of how I'm metric. So that is a big mistake. Not comping or crediting CSMs for upsell at all. Only comping them on renewal percentage of how many deals did they get to renew. Basically taking it out of we want to enable people to do the best work possible for us. So, not accrediting a CSM at all for upsell. If you are crediting it all to the account executive, the CSM has no motivation to upsell. They're like, why would I put my neck out there? Work really hard, etc. Like if I'm only after renewal and comp for renewal, you'll see a growing embitterment between them and account executives because account executives will get all the credit for their hard work in making someone successful. And then the last one is setting their quota or KPI or comp based on NPS score. NPS score, whether we like it or not, is not a great criteria to understand if our customers are happy. So, I want you to think about for a second when you have bought a software and there is a little survey that's at the bottom of that software of whether you filled it out and whether you filled it out honestly and whether you filled it out with vigor. Usually, the only time that I have filled it out with vigor is because one of 2 things. Either they did egregiously bad and I wanted to send feedback in about it, so I gave them a 0, 1, or 2, or I knew someone and wanted to reward them with an over-exacerbated amount of behavior by giving them a 10 because I knew that that's how they were comped. But in neither case scenario was it out of the, just genuine benevolence of my own heart that I'm like, you know what? I think I'll go ahead and give this person some feedback on their software. So it's usually one of those 2 cases, neither of which give us a really objective representation for the satisfaction of how customers are feeling. So quick low-hanging fruit. How to make customers more satisfied than ever is that your product works and that they're achieving the outcome at the onset they were looking to achieve by buying your software. But tying a customer success rep to the NPS score, from my perspective, again, you're going to tease out either buyers who are typically not happy, or you're going to make your CSM team start to under the table beg their customers to fill out NPS scores because they're metriced on it. Again, good theory, doesn't work out in practice. So, we got a lot of problems. I'll say what my therapist says. You got a lot of problems. Just kidding. So, we got a lot of problems. How do we solve for it? So, section number 4, I want to go into an AE and CSM comp plan without an expansion selling team. So in this case scenario, you do not have a dedicated upsell, cross-sell, etc. team with AMs or RMs. A lot of acronyms in here, but this is a comp plan if you only have account executives and you have customer success reps. So typically pre-200 people for orgs, I don't see a bifurcation out of role. So they start adding an AM and RM very seriously. Around 200 people is what I've seen. But so in this case scenario, if you just have an AE and CSM, then you're going to comp accordingly. Before we go into that, I want to start with some definitions so we can really prep for our time. There are going to be 6 different definitions that I'm going to use. Don't let the slide scare you. It's actually pretty understandable. Number 1, new land. So this is the ARR simply that the original purchase. So if I am LinkedIn and I buy Seismic for $60,000, then that is going to be the new land ARR. For today's purposes, that's what we're going to call it. Number 2 is new expansion. So let's say in that case scenario, the new land was $60,000 of Seismic, and then a Seismic expansion sold into me, and I bought $100,000 of expansion cell. So new expansion cell would be 100 ARR. New land was the original pre-existing 60 ARR. Number 3, new land renewal. So new land renewal is going to be that first 60 ARR that they sold to me on new land whenever it renews at the annual contract. So this would be a $60K new land renewal. And this is the first time that renews. So in year 1 is how we're predicating new land renewal. Number 4, new expansion renewal. So again, expansion sold that 100 ARR. Into, I think it was LinkedIn, I said, whenever I was selling for Seismic. And the first renewal of that 100 expansion ARR is defined as new expansion renewal. And then 5 and 6 are the same thing, except for after year 1, it's every other year after that. And I call that evergreen land renewal and evergreen expansion renewal. So first case scenario was $60,000 sale on the first land. Second case scenario was $100,000 upsell of expansion business that Seismic won. Number 3 was $60K again for the first year of renewal. That's what makes it new. Fourth case scenario was $100K, which was the expansion renewal for year 1 only. Case 5 and 6, 5 was the evergreen land renewal, so the $60K that comes in every year after year 1, so years 2 through infinity. And then number 6 is going to be the $100K from years 2 to infinity, is how we're going to define it today. So let's talk about the new AE, KPI, and comp plan using these definitions. So the 4 pieces of an AE KPI comp plan that can solve for the problems that we were seeing with the pre-existing system is number 1, you measure on new land for the AE and new expansion with equal weight. So, let's say I am selling for Seismic and I go into LinkedIn and I sold $60K to them. And then I also really wanted to expansion sell into them, and I was able to by $100K. So I can retire my quota as an account executive by the first new land and the first new expansion sell that I made into LinkedIn. That's piece number 1. Number 2, I would not measure on new renewals or evergreen renewals. So essentially, when this new land business renewed at year 1, I would not measure the account executive on that, nor would I measure them on the evergreen renewal, year 2 through 10. So basically, they're on new land and new expansion ARR right off the bat, but without any kind of renewal incorporated. That's step 2. Number 3, if the deal churns, you're going to think I am absolutely out of my mind, but this has worked insatiably well for me. If deal churns because of misrepresentation due to, either the account executive telling something that wasn't the truth, or that customer lacked qualifying criterion, no problem. But when the deal churns, you want to take that ARR and add it back into the quota VAE. So I have, let's say $100,000 quota. I wanted to sell $60,000 worth of software. I knew that my client wouldn't buy without this feature. I lied about what our product could do. So I get accreditation for the first $60K on the new land. And then whenever the customer churns, no problem. We've already paid out comp on this because it's, who knows, maybe it's in year 2 or 3. You're going to take that ARR. And if my quota was 100, it just became 160 because I did make this sale but this sale churned because of a lie I said in the process. So if you're using some kind of conversation intelligence software or something, have a really knit up CRM process, then you should know on record what your AEs are saying. So there's high room for accountability and no room for over embellishing the truth. So we're going to go after what the CRM says. That's a point of truth with the conversation intelligence software that's recording the conversation. But if they made a promise in terms of product or functionality, even if it was out of genuine intent, like they didn't know, that whenever that deal churns, instead of making the CSM take the hit, you want to add it into the quota for the account executive. If I didn't lose some fans, I probably have at this point. So number 4, if you want to be super particularly benevolent to your account executives, in point number 4, I would give them credit or quota alleviation for new land renewal and new expansion renewal. So again, the definition of that is renewal for the first year only. So, if you want to say like, hey, I want to rank for my account executives of, yes, we care about new land business and we care about expansion business, but we want to make sure that you guys and girls are all efforts on making them successful in their first year and preventing any kind of churn and making them get off the floor, then I would add that piece into their comp. But I, in no case scenario, would give them credit for evergreen renewal. So you want to make sure that they are all hands on deck for year 1, that they're making them successful, and then they transition the account fully into the CSM. So this is, again, if you don't have a cross-sell, upsell team with AMs and RMs, but you just have the AE, then I would, again, metric them on new land, on new expansion, meaning the first time expansion sell. I would not measure them on renewals, new renewals or evergreen renewals. Number 3, if a deal churns because of a misrepresentation that they made in the sales cycle, not a problem. Even if you've comped them out for that, you can add that into their quota for the existing time period whenever the deal churns. So there's a level of accountability. And then if you're feeling particularly benevolent, I would give them credit for new land, new expansion, new land renewal, new expansion renewal, but not evergreen. So now we know the comp system for the account executives, but what about the CSMs? How can we make sure that they pair together as a team for the overall benefit of our organization? So the CSMs, there are 3 pieces to their comp system to make sure they pair together as a team and they're metriced on the things that they control. The first one is what I would measure them on. I would measure CSMs to drive the right outcomes. Number 1, on new expansion business, meaning, in our first pre-existing example, the account executive sold new land of $60K of seismic into LinkedIn. So I would not give them credit for that. I would not give the CSM credit for that. But I would give them, number 1, expansion credit for new expansion. So they sold $60K, and the CSM can get credit for the expansion business portion. So if you're thinking I'm out of my mind because you thought, oh, wait, what am I, double paying? So new expansion weight goes to the account executive, and new expansion weight also goes to the CSM. I would always think about what is the appropriate quota here, and how can I make sure that a lot of my reps are successful, but they're not overly successful. So it means that my comp system is too low, the standards are too low. But the short answer is yes. Your account executive and your CSM are both responsible for that expansion revenue happening. And what I often see is if you don't have both of these worked into their quotas, then what you'll see is the AE closing a deal and moving on and sloughing off weight to the CSM saying like, hey, I'm only on new ARR only, so I don't give a crud whether this person's successful, number 1, but I certainly don't care about the expansion sale because I don't get credit for it. Or if the CSM doesn't get credit for the expansion sale, then they'll say like, hey, well, this AE just landed this thing, but I have no motivation to go ahead and expansion sell because, yeah, it helps the overall org, and yeah, I have some stock shares and da-da-da, and like, I'm Mother Teresa and I want to make my org successful. But you want to put a comp system together that even if you want to hire very, very benevolent, great-hearted, high-integrity people. But you want to put a comp system together that even if you hire the devil, they are still comped and metric to do the things that will make your org successful. Okay, so aim to hire great people, but could put a comp system that should be a catch-all and helps them be motivated in the right direction. So the CSM, you want to, again, set the quota appropriately, but number one, give them credit for new expansion business, not new land, but new expansion business, so that they are both the account executive and the CSM. What you'll see is them teaming together all of a sudden, because they both can get quota alleviation, and it's actually easier to get that than going after new deals for the account executive. So they're all in, and the CSM knows that it's really, really tough. It's tougher to get someone to renew than it is to get them to buy something the first time. So give you an example, and then I'll move on. I did a tour for Flip the Script. So back in February, right before COVID hit, I basically did a 9-city tour where I drove with my buddy Scott Barker across from Boston all the way to San Francisco and did 9 different cities where I did free sales training. So I had sponsors for that tour. And I had a number of sponsors where I basically said, okay, we're going to kick you the tour list. Like that is how we're, how we're quote unquote paying, or what you're getting out of as a benefit for sponsoring. But I knew at that onset, I didn't know quite what I was going to do with Flip the Script at that point. I really didn't know until a few months ago. But I had an inkling that, like, whether I do something with it or not, I want people to be very, very successful. So even though the sponsorship, it was a first-time sponsor, I viewed it as, like, I need to make these people very, very successful, because if I ever want them to sponsor Flip the Script for anything in the future, if I didn't deliver on the first batch, then, like, how am I going to get them to renew? How am I going to have the gumption to walk back in and say, no, I promise this time, it's going to be worth it. And so renewal is much harder than expansion selling, because renewal, they already know what it's like to work with you. And so it can be very, very difficult. It's difficult to coach someone, basically, like in expansion selling, they have the experience of the land, right? So it is a little more difficult than land. But on renewal, they really know what it's like to work with you. And so you want to give the CSM the option of both, that they can, really, really max out of like, okay, I just want to spend all my time expansion selling, but they do get a ding, if they are not renewing these contracts. So you make sure that you are making all things equal. So they want to spend their time in the best way possible. So number one, new expansion is how they can alleviate their quota. Number 2, new land renewal. Number 3, new expansion renewal. Number 4, evergreen land renewal. And number 5, evergreen expansion renewal, all with equal weight. So basically, they all of a sudden are wearing a CRO hat, because they know that it's equally as lucrative to them as it is to the CRO to go for the expansion business, and also keep in mind that they have to keep this book going with their renewal, because they can't afford churn, and they also can't afford churn, and they can't afford to sit on their quote unquote butt for expansion selling. The second piece of the comp system is if the customer churns from features that were promised on the roadmap that weren't delivered by product, I would subtract that renewal ARR from their quota. A lot of people out there make some promises, myself included, that they don't plan on keeping all the time. And so we want to make sure that if we say we're going to do something, that we have the gumption to put it in writing. So instead of walking to your floor, I will never forget, I was talking to a rep once who basically said, yeah, so our CEO came down to the front lines and did the whole rally the troops speech. And it's like, yeah, we really, really value SDRs, and you're the best, whatever. You have the hardest role, et cetera, rah, rah, rah. But that CEO not only cut part of our team this year, but is paying us less than industry average for SDRs. So regardless, whatever that CEO is saying, whenever he's coming to the floor to motivate us, we know that he thinks we're less valuable than the market thinks that we're valuable. So actions, I won't say they always speak louder than words, but they certainly are part of the equation. So whenever you're talking to a CSM and you're saying, oh, that's a bummer that product didn't deliver on time, instead of just singing that story to them and saying like, hey, here's the song and I hope you can accept it, I would take the bold move of taking a step forward that's saying, hey, if product doesn't deliver on something that was promised in pre-sale, to really earn the contract, or if they churn because they're unhappy, with a feature that was that we promised in the pre-sale cycle, not only is this going to be a bummer for me as a CRO, this is going to be, I'm going to take the hit for that. So I didn't get product to deliver on time and be accountable for their roadmap. So instead of the CSM taking the hit for this, of let's say their quota is, 100 ARR, that they can retire in these 5 buckets. If someone was a renewal, let's say for 20K ARR, and they churn because product didn't deliver on something that they promised to that 20K ARR client, then I would subtract that out and say, okay, CSM, your new quota is 80K. So I'm not exactly going to give you the 20K. Like you can still, if you still sit on your butt and hit 0 of 80 and 0 of 100 are the same, but I'm going to take some of that accountability and weight as the leader because it wasn't the CSM's fault in this case scenario. The third piece to the comp system, maybe I'm going to lose even some more fans at this point, is if the customer churns from a misrepresentation in the sales cycle by the AE or poor qualification, then I would subtract that out of the CSM's total as well. So CSMs around the nation are probably, building monuments in my name and everyone else is trying to burn them down to the stake. But CSMs, I don't think that they are responsible for product delivering on something that they said they deliver on or an AE giving a misrepresentation. So again, let's say that my AE, the quota was 100K for number's sake. Their quota was 100K ARR. They sold a deal for 60. The CSM, their quota was 100K as well, in the expansion selling. Customer churned for 60K. Instead of taking the hit for that with the CSM, you would subtract 100 out of the CSM's 100K ARR and say, hey, your new goal is 60. We're going to pretend like that did renew because it wasn't your fault. And now the AE, net, their new quota is not 100. It's 160 because we want to take that ARR and instead of placing it on the CSM, we want to add it back in the funnel to the account executive and say, hey, you're more than welcome to lie to our customers. I would not suggest it, but you're going to be responsible whenever these deals churn, not only from a emotional level, but from a very strict fiscal level for this missing ARR. So on a side note, net, you will actually land the same or close to the same of yes, I lost this quota attainment in terms of my CSM, but now I have increased accountability on my account executive for that deal churning. Number 5. So now we know what the comp system look for an AE and CSM if we do not have an upsell and cross-sell team. So now let's talk about what the comp system should be if you do have an AM and RM team in place. So we'll start with the AE, KPI, and comp system. Very similar to the original one. There are 3 pieces to the AE comp system. If you have a cross-sell team, again, you have a dedicated team in this case, so it's going to be quite different. Number 1, you want to measure the account executive on new land and new expansion with equal weight. So they still get credit for expansion selling because you want to give them some level of motivation to sell the deals that aren't necessarily on the initial land like an enterprise. Super lucrative, but it is for the benefit of the overall org because they're a whale. Number 2, make sure that you don't measure on new land renewal, new expansion renewal, evergreen land renewal, or evergreen expansion. So basically, they don't get any kind of renewal, whether that's year 1 or year 21, but they do get credit for new land and new expansion. And then step 3 is if a deal churns because of misrepresentation or lying in the sales cycle, I hope that you have a CI platform or a conversation intelligence platform to record your conversations. I would take that ARR and I would add it back into the account executive's quota so we make sure that everyone's accountable along the way. Let's talk about the AM RM plan. 3 steps to the AM RM plan. So anyone who doesn't know this acronym, account manager is what AM stands for, and RM is relationship manager. But basically, this is a dedicated team of your org that's responsible for upsell and cross-sell and expansion business specifically, usually for orgs that are over 200 people, unless they value it earlier. But there are 3 pieces to this comp system that you want to solve for. Number 1, I would measure my RM and AM team on new expansion business, new land renewal, new expansion renewal. Those are the 3 pieces. So if I'm an AM and RM, my account executive sold the initial land deal for 60K. I do not get credit for that. However, I'm going to chase down the additional 100K expansion sale because that's how I get measured. And I'm also in that first year going to make sure that that initial business, that 60K, whenever I was selling seismic into LinkedIn, that LinkedIn customer, that they are very successful and they're very happy, because I can also retire my quota on new land renewal or new expansion renewal. So not only am I trying to chase down LinkedIn's additional business, but I am very, very focused on, can I make LinkedIn successful for the initial core purchase and then also the expansion purchase, both with equal weight. Second piece, if a customer churns because of sales misrepresentation, it's a little bit different than the pre-existing plan. I would, or product not delivering, I would take the time out of the year that the AM/RM spent on that deal, and I would basically multiply it by the new land renewal and subtract it from the overall quota. So in this case scenario, an AM/RM, like, we don't know, we don't want to prevent them spending time on a renewal deal, because again, they're metriced on renewal for two pieces: new expansion renewal and new land renewal. And so you want to make sure that the AM/RM team, that they are after making that renewal happen. But if a deal churns because of a lie that the AE, or whatever, a misrepresentation that the AE said for whatever purposes, then the AM/RM team actually spent a lot of time trying to get that person to renew. So we want to make up for that time. So I would take, basically, let's say they were working the deal for 2 or 3 months, and the new land renewal or the new expansion renewal was going to be $100K. Then I would say, okay, 3 months is a quarter of the year. So I'm going to give them some quota alleviation of $25K, because it was a quarter of the year, 25% of the year. The new expansion renewal was $100K. So I'm going to take out $25K out of their quota. So if their quota was $200K, for instance, that they were supposed to stack up with new expansion, new land, and a new expansion renewal, new land renewal and a new expansion renewal. If the deal churns because an AE made a misrepresentation, or the product didn't deliver on a promise that was made in pre-sale, I'd say, okay, that AM/RM team, if it's new expansion, the AM/RM team spent 3 months with that deal. It churned something out of their control. So I'm going to take, that's 25% of the year. The expansion renewal was worth $100K. So that's $25,000. And instead of their quota being $200K, I'm going to lower it to $175K for them to run against. And then the last piece is, if a customer churns because of misrepresentation or not hitting qualifying criterion, or the product not delivering on the roadmap, take the time out of the year spent with the deal multiplied by the estimated expansion. So in cases 2 and 3 for expansion renewal and land renewal, what that renewal would have been. It's a little tougher for point number 3, because we don't know what the expansion sale would have been. So if a customer churns, full disclosure, 1 and 2, absolutely necessary and mandatory. Number 3, we're getting a little looser. We're getting a little more out there on a limb. So if you want to kick this point out, that's fine. But I would even go so far as to say, if I'm comping and metricing and focusing, my AM and RM team on making expansion sale happen, and we think that expansion sale was $200K, and they spent 8 months working that deal, but it couldn't happen because the deal churned, because the AE said something in the original sales cycle that we couldn't live up to, I want to comp them something for that. So you can come up with whatever that is, but what I would suggest is how much time, again, for the year that they spent toward that expansion sale, your estimated expansion, and then subtract it out of their quota. So this is a very gutsy way to metric your team, but you really communicate what you're about. Leaders, instead of saying words about what they're about, it is my perspective, being someone who has had to live up to these standards, in some cases where it hurt, of if I say that I'm about this thing, I want to put that into motion. I want to see the execution. Otherwise, in my experience, I have seen with too many teams where the leader loses trust from their team or rapport from their team because they say they're about this thing, but then they aren't delivering in terms of the inputs or in terms of the outputs, or only one or the other. So you want to make sure that you not only talk the talk, but you walk the walk on the back end. So point number 3 is a way to make sure that you're walking the walk. So you'll get a lot of trust and rapport with your team. The CSM, KPI, and comp plan, we'll go through this and then we'll close out. Number 1, so again, this is in the case scenario that you have the AM and RM team, present. So your AE was measured on new land and new expansion. Your AM team was measured on new expansion, new land renewal, new expansion renewal, but no evergreen renewal. And your CSM is measured on, you guessed it, there's overlap for each department. So the overlap between AE and AMRM is basically new expansion. The overlap between AM and CSM is new land renewal, new expansion renewal. So for the CSM case, you want to measure on new land renewal, new expansion renewal, evergreen and evergreen land and evergreen expansion, all with equal weight. And then, of course, points 2 and 3. If a customer turns from features on the roadmap that were promised and not being delivered, subtract their renewal ARR from the CSM's overall quota as if the deal did renew. And then the last point, if the same thing happens because of misrepresentation in the sales cycle, basically an AE promised something it didn't that the CSM couldn't deliver on, then you want to take that land renewal, new expansion renewal, or evergreen land or evergreen expansion, all with equal weight, and subtract it out of the CSM quota as if they did get the renewal because it wasn't their fault. So in summary, it's a very technical session, and I know there's a lot of room to be run. There's a lot of room that we can run, and we can make some improvement here. So I know that this sounds, very detailed, granular, maybe self-righteous, soapboxy, etc. episode. But I do think that there are some very, very bedrock problems that are happening between these two teams. And we need to have the boldness and courage to dream about how we could solve for those problems. So this is just a start on how to solve for those problems, to make sure that everyone's happy, motivated, and encouraged to do the right things that make money for our org. But full disclosure, I'm excited for people who watch this session and say, hey, I actually think that you could solve for it by adding in X, Y, and Z so that we can build together. But I think that the main crux, of the, not issue, but the main crux of the mood or feel of this session is that we need to do something. We need to make a strived effort and a very intentional effort on how can I, metric my CSMs very aggressively, but also make sure that they are not being dinged for things that they're not responsible for, and add a level of accountability to our account executives, because it makes the AE better, it makes the CSM better, it makes the AM and RM, relationship managers better, and it makes us better as an org overall. So I'm excited for people to deploy this, to give me your feedback so that we can all raise the standard together. So that is everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. If you like this session, you want to hear more, if you go to flipthescript.co, and you can see a litany of different sessions on all kinds of different sales topics. If you really love this session, go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn. Be sure to tag me in your top 2 takeaways so I know what you want to hear more of. But either way, I hope you have a great rest of your day.